He survived World War I because he overslept. One man, one simple mistake. A few extra minutes of sleep saved his life. This is the story of the only soldier from his entire unit who lived through the brutal Battle of the Somme. Not because he was the bravest, or the strongest, or the luckiest in a fight, but simply because he wasn't awake. Let's go back in time. It's the night of June 30th, 1916. The British trenches near the Somme River are a horrifying place. They're a graveyard waiting to happen. For weeks, the soldiers have been living in this mud-filled ditch, surrounded by the constant threat of death. Among them is Private George Kirkwood, just 19 years old. He hasn't had a proper night's sleep in weeks, kept awake by the constant artillery fire, the scurrying rats, and the gnawing fear in his stomach. For days, the officers have been promising a decisive push, a final attack that will break the deadlock and win the war. But the soldiers know better. Whispers of doom drift through the trench like a chilling fog. They know what a push really means. It means climbing over the top and running into a wall of machine gun fire. Tonight, something is different for George. The exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and numbs your soul, finally takes over. It's a deeper, heavier force than fear, stronger than discipline, more powerful than the war itself. Under a tattered, damp blanket, George finally closes his eyes and succumbs to a profound sleep, the kind he hasn't experienced since he left home. He's deaf to the world, deaf to the impending storm. The next morning, at precisely 7:30 a.m., the whistles shriek. This is the signal. All along the line, tens of thousands of British soldiers rise from the trenches. They clamber over the ladders, bayonets fixed, and charge into the filled expanse of no man's land, directly into the jaws of German machine guns. But in one small section of the trench, George Kirkwood doesn't move. He doesn't hear the high-pitched scream of the whistles. He doesn't hear his sergeant bellowing his name, a mix of fury and panic in his voice. He doesn't hear the desperate scramble of his friends, his entire unit, as they climb over the trench wall and into history. He is still fast asleep, his body buried under that torn blanket, rain dripping onto his mud-caked boots. Outside his small, oblivious world, hell has just been unleashed. What George missed was one of the single deadliest moments in the history of the British Army. The first day of the Somme offensive was an unmitigated disaster. The British High Command had confidently believed that a week-long artillery bombardment had completely destroyed the German defenses, flattened the barbed wire, and wiped out the machine gun nests. They were catastrophically wrong. The German soldiers, safe in their deep, reinforced bunkers, had simply waited out the storm. And as the British soldiers advanced in neat, orderly rows, the Germans emerged, set up their machine guns, and opened fire. The effect was devastating. Rows upon rows of British soldiers were mown down within seconds of leaving their trenches. They didn't stand a chance. George's entire platoon was wiped out. Every friend he had marched with, trained with, and shared quiet, fearful conversations with was gone. Every single man who climbed out of that trench that morning never returned. And George? He was still asleep in the mud, completely unaware of the massacre that had just erased his entire world. Hours later, George's eyes finally flutter open. The morning light is dim, filtered by smoke and fog. The first thing he notices is the silence. The deafening roar of battle has been replaced by a haunting quiet, punctuated only by the distant screams of the wounded and dying. He sits up, confused. He sees the empty trench, littered with discarded equipment and the eerie stillness of abandonment. He smells the acrid scent of smoke and blood drifting back from no man's land. "Where is everyone?" he mutters to himself, his voice hoarse. Then he sees it. The boot prints, thousands of them, all leading up and out of the trench. And he sees the bodies, lying where the edge of their trench meets the battlefield. The horrifying realization dawns on him. He missed the attack. He missed his own death. For a moment, pure terror grips him, not of the enemy, but of his own side. Sleeping through a direct order, especially in order to attack, was one of the most serious offenses a soldier could commit. The punishment was severe, often death by firing squad. He stands there alone, shaking, his rifle clutched in his hands, expecting to be court-martialed and executed. But when the officers and the support troops finally make their way to his section of the line and discover the scale of the carnage, something unexpected happens. When they learn that his entire unit has been killed to the last man, they don't punish him. They don't have the heart, or perhaps the logic, to execute the lone survivor. Instead, they simply transfer him to another unit. From that day on, George becomes a strange sort of legend. He's known as the boy who overslept. It becomes a dark joke, a sliver of morbid humor in a war that had nothing left to laugh about. Soldiers would nudge each other and point him out. That's him, the one who slept through his own funeral. George would sometimes try to laugh along, to play the part of the miraculously lucky fool. But his smile would always break. His eyes would betray a deep, haunting sorrow. Because he knew. He knew he survived not because of courage or skill, but because of a simple, accidental failure. He lived because he slept, while every friend he had died because they were awake. The guilt of that simple fact would become a heavier burden than his rifle and pack combined. George Kirkwood lived to be an old man. He survived the war, returned home, and started a family. He had children and grandchildren. He saw decades of peace. But the war never truly left him. And every single morning, for the rest of his long life, he woke up early. He never overslept again. He would rise before the sun, as if to make up for that one fateful morning. The one late morning that saved him from the early grave that claimed all his brothers in arms. That tragic irony, that twist of fate, was the shadow that walked with him until the very end. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories from history. We remember the fallen of the Somme and all who have served.